Thank you very much for being with us today. I'd just like to say a few words of introduction while the panelists are seating themselves. We, as was mentioned, this is the last in a series of 3 events. We have dragged the Honourable Minister from Hamilton to Toronto to Ottawa in 3 days. She seems to be dealing with it a lot better than myself, so I apologize with my voice. We had, as I say, this event in Hamilton that was why women, why water, why me? Very much looking at the public issues, particularly the issues that women face, and also looking at civil society and what we can do as individuals and as groups of people. And the second one in Toronto that was hosted by a Rotary Club there was smart investing in the water and sanitation crisis. So again, we've been trying to get some very different audiences at these different events to start the dialogue across sectors, again, as Madam mentioned, the horizontal as well as the vertical. And so I'd just like to share a few thoughts that have come out of these previous dialogues to contextualize today's conversation, and that is that water and sanitation, as we all know, they're essential pillars of development. They impact education, healthcare, economic development. And in as much as WASH is a pillar of development, women underpin and are custodians of water and sanitation. And indeed, they play a transformational role in life and in society. It's the women and young girls who walk kilometers to collect water for household use. On the way, they collect firewood, tend their goats, and oversee their children, as Madam Minister has pointed out on several occasions. And when poor water quality makes a family member sick, it's the mothers who are there and who look after their sick children. And when going through puberty, it's the girls that have to drop out of school through lack of water and sanitation facilities. And as a result, it's the women who have the most to gain and who are the strongest advocates for and managers of WASH. But the global water crisis is not some distant issue. It provides opportunities and challenges for all of us. There's money to be made in water and sanitation. That was made very clear at Wednesday's event, but not at anyone's expense, but through strategic partnerships, innovation, and the application of existing technologies in outside-the-box contexts. There are lives to be changed, not only on the ground in low and middle income countries, but here in Canada as volunteers learn to become ambassadors, motivators, and catalysts for change, characteristics that only serve to make Canada an even greater place to live. And so I'd like you to sort of, hopefully that's given you a flavor of the last couple of days that we've experienced with the Minister and with these other audiences. And so without further ado, I'll start introducing the panelists who will be making their presentations. And first is Clarissa Brocklehurst, an independent consultant in the water, sanitation, hygiene sector. For those of you in the WASH sector, I know she needs no further introduction at all, but I will continue and take the liberty. She started her career working on the water and sanitation needs of Indigenous communities in Canada and the United States. She managed water and sanitation projects in Togo and Sri Lanka before becoming the Bangladesh country representative for WaterAid. She was the regional urban specialist for the World Bank Water and Sanitation Program in New Delhi. She returned to Canada in 2001 for consulting. And then in 2007, she was appointed chief of UNICEF's Water, Sanitation and Hygiene section in New York. And in this role, she was very involved in the establishment of the Sanitation and Water for All partnership, in running the joint monitoring program mandated by the UN and under the UN Water, to monitor progress against the water and sanitation Millennium Development Goal targets. And in 2011, she returned to Canada and to her consulting practice, and we're very glad that she's back this side of the border. So without further ado, Clarissa, perhaps you'd like to start your presentation. Yes? Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much. I hope you can all hear me. Wave if you can't. Thank you very much, Corinne. You're looking worried. I'm wondering if it's on too.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Bring it a little closer. I need to be closer. I'll snuggle up to the mic. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here and to have an opportunity to speak, and definitely an honor to meet Minister Mutigamba again. I've been asked to kick off by looking first at some of the issues at global level to draw your attention to some of the things that have happened globally. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the MDGs. And for those of you who don't know what the MDGs are, that's the Millennium Development Goals. And these were set in the year 2000 by member states of the UN to set goals for a variety of development development areas in health, in nutrition, in gender equity, and also in environmental sustainability. And as part of environmental sustainability, a target was set for water and sanitation, to have the proportion of people without safe water and basic sanitation by the year 2015. And of course the year 2015 is almost upon us, so this is a good time to sort of take stock of what having this global set of targets has meant for us. But one thing I should point out before I even begin is that even though the MDGs were set globally, they're often interpreted at national level. So every country also has a set of MDGs. But all countries also have their own targets. So countries have national plans and they will have set their own targets. In some cases they're the same as the MDGs, in some cases they're more ambitious than the MDGs, and in some cases they're more modest than the MDGs. But the Millennium Development Goals were never intended to be a substitute for national target setting. But the MDGs are a window through which we can see what is happening globally in water supply and sanitation. And I thought I'd just run you quickly through some of the data. So I'd like to start with some good news. The good news is that we've actually met the MDG target for drinking water. It was met in 2010, and WHO and UNICEF, who run the Joint Monitoring Program, announced this in March of 2012. As you can see from that chart, when monitoring started back in 1990, about 24% of the world's population didn't have access to improved water supply, and now only 11% don't. So this is great news, particularly because the record on the MDGs has not been all that great, and it looks like this is one of only a handful that will actually be met. But how much should we celebrate? And I have to tell you that our celebrations have to be a little bit muted, and I'm going to give you a few reasons for that. One is that the MDG target for sanitation is badly off track, and it looks very unlikely that we will meet it, despite a lot of effort by many countries. This is what things looked like in 1990, and we still have 37% of the world's population without sanitation. Then going back to the water target, even though we can say that we have managed to reach the MDG, there are still a lot of people who remain unserved, or perhaps what I would say is underserved. Looking at this chart, it's a bit of a strange graphic. I hope you can follow it. The numbers on the left are the numbers for 1990. The numbers on the right are the numbers for 2010. So the slope of the line on each of those layers tells you how fast we're making progress. The two bottom layers in blue, the dark blue is piped water supply, and the light blue is other improved water supply. So this would be water supply sources that are considered likely to be safe for drinking, such as protected wells and tube wells with hand pumps. And as you can see, if you add those two together, piped on premises serves just over half the world's population, about 3.7 billion people. Other improved, about 35%. But then we get up into the unimproved sources. About 8% of the world's population, or 560 million people, are using some sort of water source that is not considered protected from the environment. So this would be open wells. And then right at the top there's only 3% of the world's population still using surface water. This is water taken directly from ponds or streams or lakes or rivers without any kind of treatment. But that still adds up to 220 million people. So all in total, we have 783 million who are still unserved. So certainly nothing to get very celebratory about. And if we look at this map of the world, we can see that sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest lowest coverage of any region. So if we look beyond the global numbers, we see that certain regions are lagging behind, and certainly sub-Saharan Africa is one. And then if I overlay this with the rural picture, you can see that it's even worse when we look at rural water supply. So still huge challenges in front of us. Again, if we look at the difference between rural and urban, we see that not only is coverage lower in rural areas, but they also don't have access to piped water. It's very unusual for rural dwellers to have access to piped water. This is the domain of urban dwellers. And so you can see that you've got 52% of the rural population still relying on water that counts as improved water supplies according to the Joint Monitoring Program definition, but this is water that you have to walk to collect, carry home, and store in the home. So it puts a huge burden on the user. And who is doing all that walking? As the other speakers have made reference to, it is women and girls, almost exclusively. And the burden that this puts on women, in addition to all the other responsibilities they carry, is of course huge. Finally, I thought I'd just show you a little bit of data relating to poverty disparities. This is a chart that shows the population of sub-Saharan Africa divided up into fifths. At the left-hand side, that's the poorest fifth, and the right-hand side is the richest fifth. And you can see that there's a distinct difference in terms of water supply coverage between those quintiles. So whereas the richest fifth has quite high water supply coverage, it's very low among the poorest fifth. And what you also see is that piped water is almost unheard of in the bottom three fifths of the population. Another way to look at disparities is by looking at an equity tree. This is for Sierra Leone. It shows that Sierra Leone overall has 55% coverage, but its rural coverage is only 35%. And then the rural poorest fifth of the population only has 10% coverage. So we have to be careful, and I think one of the lessons that we've learned from the Millennium Development Goals is that you have to look beyond the averages. You have to be able to disaggregate the data to find out what is actually happening in order to be able to peel back and see where are the areas on which we most have to focus. Finally, this is one of the more dramatic charts that I have, which is of wealth quintiles in India for sanitation. And sanitation, particularly in South Asia, is very unequally distributed. The rich have good sanitation and in fact have always had good sanitation. But the poor, as you can see, the poorest fifth of the population, almost everybody is practicing open defecation. And when we started disaggregating the sanitation data, I think it was a real surprise to us to realize how widespread open defecation was and also how much it was the domain of the poor. So what we see is there's the MDGs gives us a certain window to see some of the problems that we're having. But if we also want to look at why some of these disparities are coming about, then we have to look at the type of things that Minister Mutagamba was talking about. How are policies and plans and also the behavior of donors contributing to the fact that we have these kinds of disparities? And I just wanted to show you this chart. This is a chart of amount of donor funds for water and sanitation plotted against coverage. And what you should see there is that the y-axis there is a log scale. So in the bottom corner there, the bottom left corner, you have a lot of countries that have less than 50% coverage, but are getting less than $1 per capita from donors. And why is this happening? Obviously, donors have a tendency to fund countries with which they have an ongoing relationship. Perhaps they have a trade relationship, perhaps they have an ex-colonial relationship. But they also have huge problems in funding countries where there aren't robust policies, where there aren't good plans, and where there isn't capacity to absorb. And what we see there is that there's a lot of countries that are going to find it very difficult to make any progress on serving their poorest because they're caught in this vicious cycle of little funding for capacity building, low capacity, and then low confidence among donors. So what does the future hold? If we have this kind of analysis at our fingertips, what can it tell us as we look forward? I mean, obviously we need to finish the job. We need to finish the job of rolling out water supply and at least basic sanitation to the people who've been left behind. That is, the populations of rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly in a way that closes those inequity gaps between rich and poor. But we also, in order to do that, we have to look at the underlying bottlenecks. And many of these are policy-related bottlenecks. And not every country is as organized or as committed as the government of Uganda, that has done an amazing job of making policy setting and sector monitoring a huge priority. Many countries are struggling to do this. They're also struggling to maintain a dialogue with donors in order to keep up the donor confidence in them. And this is one of the reasons that this new partnership called Sanitation and Water for All was brought into being in about 2008. It was brought to bring ministers of finance from donor recipient countries into dialogue with ministers of development cooperation, and to bring the ministers of water and sanitation into that dialogue as well. And Minister Mutagamba has been involved in that, as has Hillary from CEDA, and as I was also at UNICEF. And this partnership shows promise in order to bring WASH as a priority to the forefront, to make the point that it is important to reaching all of our Millennium Development Goals and reaching our objectives in development. But also to bring governments together in a spirit of mutual accountability, to build capacity, provide the kind of funding that is necessary to build capacity, not just at national level, but also at local government level, and to provide the absorptive capacity so that that money that is available both from donors and from national government's own budget allocations can be well spent. And then finally, I thought I'd just say a word, because Corinne asked me to, about the development of the goals after 2015. 2015 is almost upon us, and already the UN community is starting to think about whether there will be a new generation of Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals. And I've been very privileged to be involved in part of this process. And what I see is an enormous commitment to make sure that the next time we have targets that are designed so that it gets at this issue of inequality, to design targets that raise the bar, once again challenge the global community and national governments to rise to the challenge of rolling out coverage, but to do so in a way that really provides an incentive to look for the people who have been left behind the first time around. And so it's an exciting process, certainly a very challenging one, but one I'm very glad to have a chance to talk to you about today. Thanks very much.